Last year, Dr. Michael Kinnaman, who used to be the National Council of Churches president and now lives just south of us down in San Diego, put out a new book on the response from religion to an atmosphere and a culture of fear. He did a lot of research. He's been in conversation with different religious traditions, different Christian traditions, and put together a wonderful book that outlines some of our environment and culture of fear today. But at the beginning of all of it comes one simple question that I think we all need to start with. What are you afraid of? What are you personally afraid of? For me, it's always fair to start with the self-disclosure, right? Balloons. Yes, balloons. Rubber, squeaky, evil balloons. I can see some of you are with me and the rest think I need therapy. Balloons. Not clowns. Clowns aren't scary. They just hold them sometimes. It's just a person in paint. It's the balloons that they warp into strange creatures that squeak and make unnatural, ungodly sounds as they do it, that friends might have covered me with when I was sleeping once in college. Balloons, not the Mylar tin foil balloons that float harmlessly without making sound like small Hindenburgs ready to explode. No, I'm not afraid of those. It's the squeaky, rubber, evil ones. You know what I'm talking about, right? No? Yeah, it's not really rational. But it's mine, so lay off. Our friends down at Chapman University did a study just a couple years ago on what people are afraid of. And it's neat that one of our partner universities was involved in this. They did some of the best research I've seen on things that are fear-creating and put them in categories, 11 different categories, everything from natural disasters to human-made disasters, illness and death, corruption in government, all kinds of things. Personal fears was another category that lumped in spiders and clowns in the dark and tight spaces, and I'm sure that's where balloons would fit in if anybody else besides me listed it. Over the years, we've been able to see our fears change, and Chapman's study looked specifically at what we're afraid of most. After they grouped these different types of fears, and this was just 2016, so it's not very old data, the fear that was top of the list was government corruption. As they polled folks across the country for this, government corruption was one of their top fears. Where'd they get that idea? Coming up after it, two of the next three were terrorist attacks or being victim of a terrorist event. Financial concerns, illness and death, gun control rounded out the top 8 fears that people have. So what are you afraid of? It's not always something we want to admit to ourselves. Some of us are more aware of it than others. What are you personally afraid of? And is God on your list? Is God on your list? For so long, we've heard fear of the Lord. We read those passages in the Bible that talk about the fear of the Lord, and we forget sometimes that English does not always do justice to Hebrew, Greek, or Aramaic. English does not always do justice to the meaning of words. Remember, we have one word for love we talked about a couple weeks ago where they have 6 or more in the Greek. There's lots of places where English doesn't do justice to it. And maybe the best understanding of what we call the fear of the Lord is respect for the Lord. A respect for the power, the majesty of God. For so long, we've heard people say that we should be afraid of a God who comforts. We should have fear for a God who loves us unconditionally and offers us grace. And somehow there's a disconnect when it doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem to make sense. For so long, we've heard fears of God being forgotten. We've heard this idea that God will be lost, God will be forgotten if it's not for us. As if God is still not speaking, as if God is still not acting in his life. We have this fear of the Lord, and we also have this fear of God being lost to people if it's not for us. And we forget that from generation to generation, God continues to speak anew. God continues to speak anew. God is, God always will be. God doesn't need our help, but God's people do. As Isaiah says it, we help each other by saying, take courage. Take courage, Ed. Take courage, Noah. Take courage, Jesse. We help each other as God's people. God doesn't need our help, but God's people do. God calls us to care for the community, to reach out to one another, to speak to each other in times of our irrational fears. Isaiah reminds us, God's going to be fine. All is well. People of God care for one another. God's going to be just fine in the end. This is a long scope of history. You're taking a slice, people. Don't worry. God won't be lost, but you might be. Take care of one another. God will help you. God will uphold you. All will be fine. At the end of this reading that Vanessa gave us today, Isaiah goes back and says it even again. Do not fear. Do not fear. God will help you. But today, despite all of the times the angels have brought the message, we're so afraid. We're so afraid. Not just as individuals, but as a community. We are so afraid. Before Easter, our congregation did a study on trauma. We walked through kind of the natural responses that come from traumatic events. We talked about when a bad thing happens, the instinct kicks in first. So that if your hand's on the fire, you know to move it. We talked about if someone's throwing something at you, your instinct tells you to duck. The whole fight, flight, or freeze, natural responses to bad things. And we talked about how the next thing to happen is your emotions and fear. It can also be anger. It can be frustration. It can be a whole host of fears, a whole host of emotions. But they're natural and they do happen to us. Fear on its own is not a bad thing. Fear on its own can keep us safe. Fear on its own can lead us to protect those we love. But fear can take over. Fear unchecked can become destructive. For one of us, fear can be destructive to our life. Fear can be hurtful to those around us. But fear can also dwell in a community. Fear can dwell in a community, and fear can become contagious. It can become contagious. Journal of Foreign Policy had this quote from David Rothkopf that Dr. Kinnaman picked up. There's a thin line between national security and insecurity. A thin line between national security and insecurity. For an example, we listed as our top fear in 2016 corruption of government, and we followed that by terrorist attacks and being victims of terror. Did you know you are much more likely to drown in a bathtub than be a victim of terror? You're more likely to drown in a bathtub. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than be a victim of terror. Not just by a little bit, by a lot. And I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem our government's spending near enough money to protect us from bathtub drownings. We spend lots of money about fears of other people. As we list other fears, one of the things in the Chapman study was changes in our demographic. We know that's to the history of Los Angeles, right? We talk about white flight from LA out to the valley and further out. We can trace the demographic changes. Fear of people who don't look like us. We see it echoed in conversations of immigration, of refugees. We hear these same fears passed on. And we can see that we often have an irrational fear. We put a lot of money into fear of people who are different than us. But there's a much greater fear of the bathtub in this next room. Where's our protection from the tub and the water? Where's the campaign? The disconnect between what we're afraid of and what might actually really hurt us is illogical. It's disproportionate. It almost echoes our fear of a loving God. It doesn't make sense. But fear is not logical. Fear is an emotion. It's illogical. It preys on us. It can be communal and it can be contagious. Professor Peter Stearns at George Mason said, what we've experienced lately is the social equivalent of a panic attack. The social equivalent of a panic attack. Our culture has disconnected itself from what it truly needs to be afraid of, things to protect it, to care for it. Do we need to be afraid of others? No, we need to be afraid of being divided. Do we need to be afraid of things which might have a small impact on us? Or do we need to be afraid of the divisiveness, of judgment, of condemnation, of poverty, of mental health, of those around us who do not have enough, who have extra fears from their scarcity? In one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we lift up economic concern all the time. Our fear of scarcity feeds our communal fear. Our fear of scarcity, that there's not enough love around us. Our fear of scarcity, that there's not enough acceptance around us in our community, creates the social equivalent of a panic attack. Fear can be communal and contagious. A few concerned citizens can quickly become the angry mob. A few people's anxiety can become a viral hysteria when fear takes charge. So what do? We are called to be the people of God. We stand in the footsteps of Isaiah and those who came after. We stand as caretakers of a story. We've lit a candle of hope this morning. So as we begin this journey towards Christmas, in a time of fear, what do we do as church? What do we do as people of faith? And maybe the answer is shining right before us today. We respond with hope. We respond with hope. We start telling a story of God that we respect in the face of a God that others have been told to fear. We start telling the story of a God who gives grace in the face of others' condemnation. We tell a story of God who is with us and always will be with us, whose presence we never need to fear. God will not abandon us. That's the message throughout Scripture, over and over, continually. God is with us and will not abandon us. It's our fear that causes us to retreat from God. It's our fear that causes us to distance from God and one another. It's our fear that causes us to tell others God might have abandoned them so that we feel like God's closer to us, as if God is the scarcity, rather than our hope being the scarcity. Brothers and sisters, hope is what is scarce of anything, and we have an abundance of it. We have an abundance of it to share, for it is a continual gift from God. It is a light that never goes out. In the darkness of others, in the fear of others, may we preach hope. Fear is not a bad thing until it takes over. So we will tell the story of hope. When others preach division, when they tell you that you should love someone else so that you're not afraid of God, we will say we will love them out of hope because God first loved us. When others say we should divide out of fear of what someone may do to us, we will stand in hope of what that person may bless us with because they are a child of God. When others preach fear, we will speak a word of hope and comfort. We will comfort God's people. We will prepare a way through the darkness of fear with the light of hope. We will lower every mountain meant to keep us away and frighten us. We will fill every valley and emptiness with the light of hope. Of hope. And we will prepare the way of the Lord. And as we proclaim hope, the angels' chorus of Christmas will be heard again. Do not be afraid. Do not be